Hey, how's it going, guys? I've got something really special for you guys today. We're going to be talking about how to maximize damage in Gunfire Reborn, get a little bit of a better sense of how damage is calculated, how all that kind of comes together, and how you can actually get your hands dirty. I'll have something that I can share with you guys that you guys can use. I'm a hands-on learner. Most people, I think, are to at least some degree. So I will have something that you can actually get your fingers into and play around with the damage in Gunfire Reborn. I'll give you a little sneak peek of that right here. I have created the Gunfire Epic Weapon Damage Calculator. I've got this looked at by some of the guys in Discord, and it looks like it's working correctly. We'll go over this here in just a bit. First things first, I want to talk about a couple other key points first. First thing I want to talk about is additive versus multiplicative damage. The idea here between these two situations is that additive damage, as you get more of the same damage increase, it gets less and less effective, okay? But multiplicative damage, each time you get more multiplicative damage increases, they stack on each other without any reduction in that damage increase. So multiplicative damage boosts are so important. You've heard me talk about that in the channel. We're going to get into detail about that a little bit more. So I'm going to pull up some actual instances of which one's which right now. So first up, let's talk about Spirit Bible. What do you think? Multiplicative or additive? It's additive, all right? This is a percentage skill damage increase. So all skill damage increases go into the same bucket and therefore get diminishing returns. Not like exponentially diminishing, but they are an additive increase. So they're not quite as much. And keep in mind, I'm going to give you examples of these. So this is just to prepare your mind to understand the situation a little better. Right now, what I'm trying to get you to look at is to see when something is multiplicative versus additive and to get a sense of why that's the case. Okay, next up here we have untold effort. When using a secondary skill, there's a 50% chance to double the consumption and deal double damage. So, in my experience thus far, because this is saying dealing double damage, it's literally doubling the damage, which is a 100% multiplicative damage increase. All right, that is multiplicative. When you see, what is it called? Skill Freak. Skill Freak says it doubles your damage. And so we saw Spirit Bible additive going into the skill damage bucket. This is doubling damage. This is a multiplicative damage increase. Next up, let's talk about Elemental Relic. Plus 5% elemental damage for 10 seconds whenever you kill an enemy affected by an elemental effect. What do you think, additive or multiplicative? Additive, okay? But what's important to understand here is that, say we do a skill, we've got Spirit Bible, right? Say we do a skill, all right? So it gets boosted by Spirit Bible, that does elemental damage. So these two things are in two different buckets. So while all skill damage goes in the same bucket and therefore is additive with itself, this new elemental damage is multiplicative with the skill damage because they're in two different buckets. All right, is that making sense? So if I get plus 100 skill damage and plus 100 elemental damage, 100% rather, both of those are multiplicative damage increases with each other. All right, but if I get 100 elemental and another 100 elemental, those are additive together because they're within the elemental bucket. Next up, let's look at Abundant Vitality. What do you think? Plus 75% weapon damage while your shield is recharging. It is actually multiplicative. So, great learning experience here. There's a little bit of inconsistency. This says plus 75 weapon damage while your shield is recharging. All right, so things that say like damage dealt tend to be more like that multiplicative damage increase. But something like this is not clear which one it's going to be. As it turns out, it is confirmed to be multiplicative damage increase. But anything that's saying like percent weapon damage is going to be in the weapon damage bucket as additive damage most of the time. Normally, things that improve your that affect like base weapon damage are in the same bucket as weapon upgrades are. So something to keep in mind. Okay, next up, let's look at Lucky Shot. Lucky Shot has a random chance to multiply weapon damage by a certain amount based on the Lucky Shot percentage. It's similar to random critical hits, but can stack and does all this, interesting stuff here. So what do you think? Additive or multiplicative? Multiplicative. So it's mostly multiplicative. The idea is that, when you're getting a lucky shot, you're doing double damage, okay? So like the way lucky shot stacks with itself is kind of weird. So we're not going to get too far into that because I think we get the weeds really quickly. But like your first 100% lucky shot chance is a 100% multiplicative damage increase. And it could be the case that more lucky shot is still multiplicative. And I think that it is. I'm not 100% sure about that. But I should know if I'm making this video. But you know what? I'm going to leave you with a little uncertainty because the rest of the stuff I'm going to talk about works great. All right, last thing before we move on here is crit X. So critical hits will stack multiplicatively with lucky shot when they occur at the same time, dealing far greater damage. Okay, so let's say we have a weapon with 2x crit and we get something that gives us 0.4 extra crit. Okay, is that an additive or a multiplicative increase? That is an additive increase. The crit X is a bucket, so all of the crit X that goes into it is additive with each other. The best way to think about this is, say you have a weapon that does 100 damage with a 2 times crit. When you crit, you're going to do 200 damage, right? Well, let's say that we increase that crit by two more, okay? So we get, so that 2 more crit multiplies our damage not by 200% but by 100% because we're just doubling our crit. So our crit went from 2x, 200 damage, to 4x, 400 damage. All right, and that's a 100% increase, even though we've doubled our crit. Is that going to be helpful for you? I don't know, but it is the truth, and we're gonna get our hands dirty. So stick with me. The last thing that I'm gonna say before I get into some cool calculations is that damage increase is inherently chunked. What I mean by that is we're going to talk about how to spread out our damage and why that's best, okay? And you could get in your head about how this all kind of works out in the math, and that's why I've given you something you can get your hands dirty in. But one thing that we need to keep in mind is that when we're making decisions about damage increase in the game, all of that happens in chunks. We don't get to scale up values and scale down values exactly what we want. No, we're given an opportunity to pick up a weapon that has specific inscriptions. We get specific scrolls, and because of that, things come into us in chunks, in a scroll, in an inscription, in a weapon. And so those things are not flexible values. So when we're thinking about where we want all those chunks of pieces of damage to fit, we need to spread that out so that all of our different damage buckets, which are multiplicative increases with each other, are not wasted by putting too many marbles into one bucket that is all additive with each other. So now, let's get to some cool calculations. Okay, so we are going to be working on the scalpel. I have copied the stats from the wiki page into this column here, and so we're going to be doing some of our damage calculations on the scalpel. Okay, so take this in. All right, let me just walk you through it first of all. Okay, we're going to start here. This is the weapon stats. Okay, so we're just going to put that in straight from the Wikipedia page. These are mostly, this type of stuff is not really something that, okay, the talent stuff here is not really for editing. Neither is the rate of fire loss from reload. These are all sort of intermediate calculations. So say you want to do this without your talent tree, you can actually remove these things. But this is a weird one. We'll come back to that. The things that you can change and that you can look at for how your damage changes is all of this. So this is going to come out and actually show you how your damage increases and is changing. So what set previous does here is it takes the damages here and puts them in this previous column so that when you change something, so let's say that I give it 3 upgrades at a craftsman. All right, I can see that this gives me a 45% damage increase across all of these categories. The categories are average damage per second. Average damage per second if everything's a crit. No lucky shots included damage per second. Only lucky shots damage per second. and then lucky shots plus crits damage per second. Then we can look at the average individual shot and whether or not that's critting. Okay, and so when we click set previous here, it moves all this data over. Then we can change things and see how that difference plays out. Make sense? So let's go ahead and start playing around with this. So we're going to remove our weapon upgrades back to 0. The first thing I want to show you is an indication of how additive and multiplicative damages work. When I click this calc damage here, you're going to see this calculation up here. Notice that these strings of calculations here that are all grouped like this, that's a bucket. That is those additive damage buckets. And these ones here are those multiplicative damage buckets. So if I click this, see these are all enemy debuffs, which are multiplicative with each other. But conversely, if I click here, I can see that this goes to N7. Here, explosion damage increases all go into the same bucket, and so they're additive with each other for the most part. Obviously, with Gunfire Reborn, there's not a clear answer, but this is instructive more so than it is exactly the case, because this having a good sense of where I'm getting to is going to be very useful for you doing a lot of damage. So let's say we have a scalpel here, and we get a base damage increase. So let's say we get a base damage increase of 40%. All right, so that damage increase is an actual 32% overall damage increase. Now, why 32%? Why isn't it 40%? Well, it's because there's already something in the bucket. Your talent weapon damage is already 25%. So let's say let's remove this, and let's say we didn't have any weapon damage here. Set previous. Now if I go in here, boom, you're seeing that 40% damage increase, right? And so that should give you a little bit of that first indication why spreading out over multiple buckets is going to be more effective, because each time, the first thing you put into each bucket is like full value. You know, you're getting 40%. And it doesn't mean that adding more is worse. It just means it's not quite as effective. And if you have options, understanding what your options are can allow you to actually improve your damage more than you might have realized. So let's fix this. Back to 0, 25. Okay, so now let's set previous. We're back to baseline. And let's say we get 40% damage increase. So that's a 32% damage increase. Okay, cool. All right. So now we've saved that. That's our now previous damage. We've got the 40% in there. All right. Now let's say we gain a whopping 100% base damage increase. We're putting it in the same bucket though. All right. That's only a 60% overall damage increase. Well, we just got 100% damage. All right. Boom. It's starting to become more and more clear. All right. How all this works. Okay. Set that to previous. Now, if I add in some elemental damage, let's say the scalpel has an elemental inscription and it's doing fire damage, and I say I'm doing 25% more fire damage, what we should see here is that there's nothing in the bucket, and we should be getting a pure 25% damage increase. All right. Let's say also that we manage to increase our rate of fire by 25%. Boom. Now that increased our damage. Not necessarily directly linearly. There's some weirdness with rate of fire increases. I guess this is a good time. Actually, it's not. Okay, never mind. Ignore that. All right, let's say we also somehow manage to get 25% explosion damage increase. All right, and we get 0.5 projectiles. All right, and maybe we'll just do 1. That'll make it a little bit more clear. So we just doubled our projectiles. Yeah. All right. We're seeing that these damage increases are all stacking up really, really well. Now, let's take all that out. And once again, take a look at what it looks like just to add the same things. So I want 250% damage, elemental damage increase. And then I've got a huge amount of elemental damage increase, but then I get, 30 more. Oof, so weak. when you start really getting a high amount of percent damage increase in these buckets, then this little additional damage is so unimpactful. If you have the option between 30% damage increase or even a 5% rate of fire increase, whoops. All right, 5% didn't turn out to be quite as good as I hoped. Let's say 25%. That 25% rate of fire increase is going to do much better. One thing to keep in mind is that the scalpel already has a huge rate of fire, and so because we already have high rate of fire, that rate of fire increase is going in the same bucket, and that effect is not nearly as useful. If we get a magazine increase, though, we can look at how this affects the damage, and a reload decrease of 55% on with, like, you know, the one that when you run out of ammo, it's 55% increased reload time. That was a pretty big increase right there because it took our reload time down. So one thing I haven't mentioned, just because I'm talking and excited, is that all of this stuff gets calculated here into these calculated damage, rate of fire, magazine total, reload time, crit, all this kind of stuff, all gets calculated here and then gets pulled down into here. All right. So we can use this also to try to make, so say we have like a low, like we're trying to play something like Energy Blade Cat or Fatal Current Lay Low, and we're trying to get like the most damage in like a single shot because that's going to be the most benefit for us. It actually turns out that the rate of fire, magazine increase, and reload time decrease don't really do anything for us. So let me pull in a different weapon here. All right, so here I'm going to pull in the Go Shock. It does 400 damage with a 4 times crit multiplier, a rate of fire of 0.9, magazine 5, reload 2.05, and it's called the Goshawk, excuse me, not Go Shock. I think it's Goshawk. Someone informed me that I was saying that incorrectly, which I really appreciate. Okay, so now let's get everything back to baseline. I think that covers everything. And let's start from here. So with a weapon where you're trying to get a large amount of like single shot damage, certain things don't matter. Okay, so you know, base damage 40%, that's great, but rate of fire increases. See these two here? No change. So if we're trying, so say like we take that particular inscription that gives 40% lucky shot chance at a minus 25 rate of fire. So we can do that, minus 25, but a 40% lucky shot increase. We can see that that actually has a really good positive impact on our average shot chance. And we have a lucky shot calculation here that's doing pretty good. Another thing to keep in mind is if we can get like another 35 lucky shot, getting to that guaranteed lucky shot on every shot is so important because our average DPS goes way up. One sec. I got a little confused there. So our average shot here is obviously very high. You know, if I can get 1,320 damage and on an average shot, and then 594 damage on a single crit shot, that's starting to get really good. And this doesn't even include our lucky shot, which is actually kind of a mistake. I may add that to the thing to see what your average shot with a lucky shot would look like, because that's when the damage starts to get really high. Anyway, that's how we can use this to maximize our single shot damage. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is multiplicative damage increases and why they make such a big difference. So we've got our Go Shock here. We're doing good damage. Let's say we've got 60 damage here. We've got a little 15% more lucky shot there. We've got some 0.2 projectiles. So every once in a while we'll do that, and maybe even like a 0.4 crit increase. We're starting to get up into the damage. It's starting to get pretty good. And let's say that we get a skill damage of 300% attack damage on the next attack because of Energy Blade. So now now you can see how we're starting to pop that damage really high, and that's AoE damage as well. All that's really good, obviously. But The really, really strong thing is when you start adding those multiplicative damage increases in, because they affect everything. So if I get Hex Smoke, that's a 20% multiplicative damage boost. We just gained by adding 20%, let's take that away. Watch these numbers, okay? So DPS went from 316 to 399. Huge jump in increase, just from a 20% multiplicative damage and boost. Say instead, of this 20%, we have the death mark, 60% from King Young on the bird. Huge damage increases. Huge damage increases. Let's say instead of 0.2 projectiles, we have the 1 projectile but double consumption. And you're starting to get some absolutely nutso damage. All right? This is going to be linked in the description. I strongly suggest you play around with it, get a sense of how this works. You will have to go to the link and then either copy it or download it yourself to be able to actually edit it. I really hope that it's helpful for you and something that you can use. I think it's really, really cool. Yeah, I just hope that it helps you out as much as it's helped me out understanding all this. So anyway, if you like this video, you feel free to subscribe, but don't feel like you have to. I do this for fun. I'm really just here to try to help the community. Not really doing this very much for me. So if you do subscribe, just subscribe for you. Don't do it for me. Me and you are cool. You can just, the algorithm will suggest this video if the algorithm has deemed you as someone who would like to see it. So if that's good enough for you, it's good enough for me. Have a good day.